Well, hello everyone. It's like you talk to you about it's like the Golden Wing is like and you're talking about is like you're talking is the story about they say airplanes it is of course aircrafts it is and most of us if most of us are familiar with like you say the plane designs right here as you have right here it says it's they say I guess they call it commercial jet and of course we got the helicopter and of course it's like another particular plane of course that I used to call, of course, is the biplane. And I could probably think about it. So if I was talking about with the Golden Wing, it is talking about is that why did I used to call it the Golden Wing? More likely, maybe the biplane. Why I used to call it the biplane. It is, and a lot of times it was maybe the fact about you have right here is the pilot will be sitting at about right here. It is, the pilot. But right here, and a lot of times it's like a lot of people probably thinking about it, it's like with the say with the biplane, the way it was designed and stuff, and of course you would have right here is the wing right here. Got the wing at about right here, and then you got the outer part say of the plane right here. But I used to always wonder that of course that say my parents, it's like my dad and I, of course we that we would you say do research but of course I used to call it is like the biplane it is and I guess what was the reason? Well, more likely maybe because it was like a plane that goes at like what you call it like flies they say has a certain angle in a lot of ways. I don't know, was the name biplane, I guess, was that just a name that I gave it, or was it the fact about what it was called? And I'm sure a lot of people were probably thinking about that the way it was designed, of course, that the way the wingspan was designed, and then of course that the way that the landing gear was designed, and then of course it's like you got right here is the way it flies. It was the way it flies, and you have right here is the engine part of it, and you got there you say the propellers, but other than that it's like which says commercial biplane. It's like you have right here. I think usually it's about two-seater say plane that you don't have no say it's most of it's open. You have right here it's like what you call the pilot seat, and of course and then then you would have like what you call is like a few say controls about right here that those particular things that you'd see on one of those movies it was, but anyway that the guy right here is with the biplane it is. And but the whole part about the story is what I got to talk about, of course, is like what you call is like with the Golden Wing, is it talking about is like the types of things. Of course, go ahead and maybe draw some details, say of some clouds, if it will be flying within about a few say 100 thousand or so feet. It is you say above the sky. It is, but basically, whenever I was young, I remember walking around in the yard, over there at where I used to live. It was, and just knowing about it's like you have right here is the paper plane too. But got right there is me right here, and be walking, and then of course I would see some real. Sometimes they were pretty strange. They were pretty strange to me that I would see planes, at like an angle right here, but and quite a few of them, like this one right here, this type of plane right here, is that with most of us we're probably thinking about. It's like, yeah, you see them, and I remember I would see them in the sky a lot of times, and they would look about like this, maybe a little bit smaller, but a lot of times you would be able to hear the engine sound of them. And with most kids, it's like knowing about that you see the planes, and maybe you may have a few model planes say that you put together, and of course you fly say in the backyard or say in the front yard. But on the other hand too, that you have a plane like this, and a lot of kids will be say curious about it, about the plane and just knowing about you want to reach up and try to try to grab it. Or it's like I know with me that the story they say in my childhood is talking about like with the planes that I've had several dreams. I'm not talking about maybe a few dreams, but I've had several dreams, of course, about going to the airport, since I've been to the airport a couple of times before. My first plane ride it was, and you go into the airport, kind of like this right here. say the terminal, and that there will be like what you call, is in my dream that there will be like tunnels. If I remember right, that there would be like tunnels, that they would have it to where that you would get on board, say a jet, kind of like this right here. That there would be like, say, a jetliner airplane about right here. But that there would be like, you say, tunnels that would wrap around, and then you would climb into the tunnels just to get on board the plane. It was. Go ahead and make that tunnel maybe just a little bit more realistic. But anyway, if you were, it's like, a type of tunnel that maybe that look like a drainage pipe or anything. But anyway, you would climb a. This is in my dream, though. I'll make knowing about whenever I first went on the airplane. Is like knowing about getting through security and all that stuff. Is like over there at the airport. Back 5 years ago it was that I remember that people would. I remember I had dreams about people would be like, hey, you're getting on board a plane, and then. Where we going? And then I think if I can remember right in my dream, I think one of the places may have been Utah or Michigan or whatever. But on the other hand, too, that knowing about is like I would at least go somewhere. And then in my dream, that I remember being at the airport, and I don't know if I had any luggage or not. If I can remember right in my dream, if I had any type of luggage or anything like that. But I would be at the airport, and then they would tell you that. You got to board the plane now. It's like go and climb through the tunnel. Just to be able to get through the gate. It is, and a lot of times I see it on movies, and of course, it's maybe, seen it, about that, whenever I went to the airports, that they would have like what you call those cross gates. It is where you get on board the plane. It was, but at the time I was like that. Airplane rides to me that felt a lot like, you say, what I describe as time travel. It's like a type of sky travel to where that a type of time travel to where that you travel by a nick of time, by a source of time. It is knowing about that if you go from state to state or from country to country, it is, and just knowing about that for the amount of time it takes for you to get there compared to an ordinary say transportation type vehicle. It is. And in a lot of ways that a lot of people probably thinking about is like that, they may wind up spending close to maybe $100 or more on something that maybe works just a little bit faster, if it's what you call is like a real powerful computer, or if what you say is like a moon that you can take home with you, whatever it is. And a lot of times it's like I would include that moon is like knowing about whenever on my first airplane ride, of course, is like knowing about that I can remember my first airplane ride very well. Is whenever I went up to Washington D.C., flew from St. Louis to Washington D.C., and then of course flew back. And I can remember, I think it was the St. Louis International Airport to the Ronald Reagan International Airport, I think the name of it was, and then flew back. And then of course you have right here is the seats right here, and a lot of times with the seats, but. My memories can go on and on, of course, about what I can remember about the trip. But basically, talking about is talking about the story about the beginning. It was that I used to think that flying, that it just seemed like that you had to have at least $200 or $300 or so saved up. It's like knowing about with me. That I always wondered about whenever my first airplane ride was ever going to come. Maybe my first helicopter ride it was, and knowing about with most kids that they fly to different places it is. But on the other hand too, that knowing about that I used to have dreams about the airport, and now I have dreams about that more likely somebody is going to maybe ask me to go on an airplane ride. Say again it is, and more likely, I could probably think about that if anything, maybe the next Golden Wing trip may be, the Disney World it is. But before we get to that part, is knowing about, it's like right here, before it's like talking about, it's like a character, like this right here. A character with ears like this right here. It's like what you call is like Disney, say Looney Tune, it is character right here. And then go ahead and draw like what you call is like a small like this right here. But other than that, it's like knowing about with me that is like you talk about is like the stories about sky travel. It is, and a lot of people will probably thinking about that hey, that with most of the time with aircrafts, and I remember I had a few toy aircrafts it was, but on your hand too that knowing about is like the types of planes that I used to see whenever I was very young. It was, and one of them of course was this type of plane right here that I thought that this one was pretty weird looking. I had a few dreams that I used to think that one of these planes was going to come down low in the air, and one of those things that you would see on like one of those one of those war movies. It was. It's like talking about that, like one of those movies to where that you have a plane that flies down below, from the air and then starts shooting at you, whatever it is. But anyway, but the plane looked like kind of like this right here, to where it would have wingspans going forward, but then the plane will be going, coming from, going from, say this direction. I guess that would be like what you call south part, west part. You say the sky. It's like and about it'll be kind of like a Superman, like a Superman type look. It's like right here is the arms. It will look like type of like a Superman type aircraft. In a lot of ways, I always wondered about what people probably thinking about. Hey, what is that? Like other than a story about what say is for UFO it is, and people probably thinking about identified flying object it is. But knowing about with me that you could probably think about is that with anything that you would see interesting in the sky it is. But on your hand too, that knowing about is like you got right here is the moon, and with the moon that you could probably thinking about that anything interesting to you that you may see in the sky, even a little kid would probably thinking about. That's like I want to reach up and touch the stars, touch the clouds and stuff. Touch the aircrafts, but whenever I was young, of course, it's like talk about with the Golden Wing is talking about is that whenever I would see the aircrafts in the sky, a lot of times I would usually think that hey, I'm like that real interesting looking aircraft it is, but on there too, how am I going to get up there? A lot of times I remember that, how am I going to get up there? Because, the airport was probably about, I would say, at least 15 miles from where I used to live. And of course, a lot of times, if there was an airport pretty close by, like the St. Louis airport, that a lot of times they could probably thinking about that hey, you're not going to be able to cross that gate anytime soon or whatever. But on the other hand too, I don't know if it's really a matter of the question about you won't be able to cross the gate. It's all a matter about what I guess really what the arrangement and what your plans are about knowing about that keep it in mind is knowing about it may take a few months, maybe a few years, but just knowing about that whatever that you put your mind up to and keep thinking about it. It's like with the Golden Wing it is, and just knowing about that the story about whenever I first traveled, it was my first airplane ride. Of course, didn't get scared or nothing, but on the other hand too, the experience though was like knowing about it's like by the time you get off the plane, you're in a different place. So in a lot of ways, people probably thinking about that. On the other hand too, that knowing about it's like with that different place it is, and knowing about it's like other than what you call is like maybe going somewhere, say overseas it is. But other than that, is talk about with the Golden Wing. It's like for the coloring, say you got the biplane, as long as that it with the Golden Wing, say coloring story.